from a cost perspective, what should customers be aware of?
Yeah, so when it comes to sharing and collaboration, one thing that customers really want is that when you're sharing externally, you want to minimize your cost as a data provider. And also, you want to leave the recipients in control of their own costs so that they are incentivized to kind of use the assets in the most efficient way. So, the way it works is generally speaking, there's obviously a lot of nuances, but generally speaking, the provider is really responsible for the storage of the assets, which basically is what they are responsible for anyway, because these are their own assets that they are storing in their own lake house or data lakes. And that's it. And then all the compute to consume those assets is the responsibility of the recipient. So the recipient are responsible for the queries or the analysis that they're running because that's compute that runs on their side. So this is really a zero copy live sharing protocol where there isn't really any compute on the provider side. There's a little bit of nuances here and there. I think the biggest nuance that I'm going to talk about as well is egress cost. So as you know, the cloud providers, AWS, Azure, GCP, have this thing called egress cost. So every time you access a storage bucket from a different region, from a different cloud region, there's a cost that comes to that typically is charged to the provider. And we have a bunch of functionalities and features, including a new one that I'm excited about called global distribution, that really makes that optimized to minimize the egress cost for the providers.
I'm glad you mentioned Egress because I was going to be like, what about Egress? So, with that said, obviously, this new thing you just mentioned right now, can you walk us through how that is going to work?
Yes, so it's called global distribution, and it's a feature that comes natively within Databricks OpenSharing, and it allows a provider of data or AI assets to share their data with recipients that use different clouds, different regions, and even different platforms while minimizing the egress cost that is charged by the underlying cloud storage providers. And to do so, the egress cost is optimized by creating local replicas of those assets in the region of the recipient. The current world with the data sharing protocol, you can share data directly from your cloud storage. And this is actually very important because customers don't want to have multiple copies of their data. They just want to have one copy at the source and then share that live copy everywhere. And they, at the same time, want to minimize egress cost. And when you have recipients that live in different regions or different clouds, you end up having this egress cost that adds up. And more importantly, the data provider doesn't really have control over that egress cost because it depends on the query patterns of the recipient. So that creates a visibility and predictability problem for the providers because they don't really know how much this is going to end up costing at the end of the day. So it ends up creating lack of visibility for providers in terms of the cost. And then on the recipient side, when you're doing cross cloud and cross region sharing, the performance takes a hit because now you have latency. So sometimes it's actually okay to do a cross cloud or cross region share because it gives you kind of the latest and freshest data directly at the source. But in other cases, latency is more important to have great performance. So that's why we have this feature called global distribution that is now available in private preview that minimizes egress cost, improves query performance, and is completely transparent to the data recipient and even to the data provider. So it's a very simple toggle. I'm going to do a quick demo. The demo is so short because it's very simple to set up. It's basically when I'm creating a share, I choose a recipient and then I turn it on. And if I turn it on, that recipient, instead of reading the data directly across clouds and regions, they are reading from a local cache or a local replica, if you will, that is fully managed by Databricks. It is completely transparent to both the provider and the recipient. And from their perspective, the recipient is just accessing the share, and the performance is as if it was local. And the egress cost is optimized from the provider because every time the recipient runs a query, it doesn't have to go through the cross-region path. It reads directly from the local region. So this is pretty much the benefit, is to minimize egress cost, improve performance, and really make that very simple for both the provider and the recipient.
Want to show us the demo?
All right, so let's get with the demo. So I am here sitting in a workspace that we use internally for testing the product and dog fooding. So if I go to my Unity catalog and I go to my OpenSharing page, I see all the shares, and you can see we do a lot of testing. So there's a lot of shares here. I can see the shares that are incoming and then the shares that I have created myself. And if I want to share data, all I have to do is create a share and then assign it with a recipient. I have actually already created a recipient that is in Azure. So I am now in AWS, and I have an Azure recipient that I have created. So if I go here and I create a new share for that recipient, so my new share to Azure. So this is a cross cloud share. So normally, if I do a cross cloud share, I would have to either worry about egress costs, or I would have to worry about some sort of replication to move the data to Azure. But I may not be necessarily an Azure customer. If I'm using AWS, or vice versa, if I'm using Azure, I may not be an AWS customer. So I want to share with this external company that is on Azure without actually having to worry about any infrastructure, while at the same time minimizing my egress cost that is charged by S3. So here I create a new share to Azure. I choose the asset, so I'm just gonna pick some random assets here that I want to share. Let me just pick here. I think I might have some data here that I want to share. I can save and continue. It's asking me if I want to add a notebook. I don't need to add a notebook in this case. And then I can basically choose any recipient that I want. In this particular case, I chose this recipient in Azure West US. And today, in this workspace that I'm using is in AWS. So this is really a cross-region, cross-cloud share. And I have this small toggle. So this is pretty much the feature. It's like super simple. If I turn on this toggle and then share data, then when this share is created, all the data that I have added here is automatically replicated to the Azure region by Databricks, so that the recipient can automatically access that data. So when you go to the recipient side, so I am here in Azure and I look for those shares, they appear as like regular shares. So I have here like the data they shared with me, and it's like the same experience as if it was a cross-region share. So there is really nothing that is different from that perspective. It's a regular catalog that I can basically access and govern with Unity Catalog, and I can query it, and the performance is local region performance. And from the provider's perspective, I didn't have to have any presence on the other cloud. I didn't have to manage any infrastructure on the other cloud. Databricks takes care of actually replicating this data to the other regions. So this is pretty much the experience here. It's available right now in private preview, and it's called global distribution.
If I have, say, my Databricks in AWS, and I create, when I create that availability on Azure, and I have my own Azure account, can I do that?
Yeah, so in this current release, you don't have to worry about having or managing or even operating any infrastructure on the other cloud or region. Like, we take care of all of that headache so that you don't have to. So it's a fully managed experience. And actually, that's what a lot of the data providers and the AI assets providers have told us, is that they want to be able to share those assets without having to manage the infrastructure themselves, because that just introduces additional security and operational overhead that they would rather not deal with. So as of today, it's like a fully managed experience. We haven't heard a lot of customers ask for, like, can I use this feature and then manage my own infrastructure? Because then they would have to have infrastructure in every region, because like they might have like recipients in different regions that they have no presence in. So that just becomes a little bit of a question mark for them to manage. But if we hear from customers, it's obviously, like, we always do what customers need. So if we hear from customers that they want to use this feature on their own storage layer in the other cloud, we will prioritize that and make it happen. But that hasn't been something that customers have asked for.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that the managed nature of this is pretty awesome. Like, to your point, because I know a lot of folks talk about being multi-cloud and all that. In practice, that gets a little bit tricky for most organizations. And if you're a especially a small or mid-size, and even a large enterprise, and you do want to make your data available, on so many regions across so many clouds, and the fact that you are abstracting that data availability piece or component, that is pretty sweet, if especially if you're a data vendor, etc. So
100%. So that's like something that is a lot of customers have been asking for. And I think there are use cases where customers want to do cross-cloud, cross-region share live. For example, if they use Cloudflare R2, which doesn't charge any egress cost, that's always been an option for our customers. And that's something that like many providers are happy with. Or if they want the recipient to always get like the latest, freshest data, that's also a scenario. But like many scenarios, we see providers trying to optimize egress costs because they can add up, especially if the query patterns are very frequent. In those cases, this is a feature that makes it super easy to distribute this data. I think of it a little bit as like a CDN for data. So it creates like a distribution network for your data and makes it like a local copy for every recipient, no matter for every region globally.